we've got a great cross-section of sort of sellers and buyers, all of which are aspiring to enable this converged world in which we live. And I hesitate around, I say one audience for one video, for video, but I'm gonna put some guardrails around that. So, a couple things, just having participated in yesterday's event and today, I'm going to, hi. Sit down here, please. I'm gonna put a couple guardrails. So, so the first thing is this is an analogy I'll make coming from, there's been a lot of jokes about my country and our politics, but I'll just say one of the things that I've concluded over the last couple months specifically is that equality is not like pie. It's not like if you have a piece, there's less for me. And I kind of feel we should take that same perspective on media. So let's assume that if we can deliver greater ROI and thread the needle back to delivering greater sales, more profitable sales for a marketer or advertiser, they'll find more money, right? So let's get rid of the walled garden, us versus them thing. The second thing is let's frame the conversation to premium content. And I believe Tom from Freewheel described that as brand safe, premium funded, and rights managed. So let's just keep keep it in those guardrails to make it a more focused conversation. And then I think lastly, just to tee it up, I want you guys to start with just quickly your names and what you do, and then let's start talking. I'll start here.
Jonathan Davies. I head up all the global advertiser partnerships for Eurosport and Discovery International.
Very good. My name is Calvin Johnson. I work on the AdCloud TV team for Adobe. So the AdCloud TV is really kind of the TV division of the Adobe DSP, legacy kind of 2-mogul product.
I'm Brian Golbere, and I'm General Manager for Emerging Technologies at IPONWEB, and basically enabling intelligence connectivity between these trading platforms with a focus on traditional media as it transitions to programmatic, data-driven, intelligence-enabled buying.
Mark Holden. I'm a Global Strategy Director at Starcom, part of the Publicis Group, and I lead cross-channel strategy for some of our key clients across Europe.
Awesome.
And I'm Jenny Biggam. I run the 7 Stars, which is the UK's biggest independent media planning and buying agency.
And Jenny's slaying it, having won another award. So
thank you.
Kudos to you. Bravo.
Agency of the Year.
Yeah, bravo. Go, girl. Okay, so just to tee it up, let's try and minimize our use of 3-letter acronyms too. I think that would be aspirational for us. I'll eat my own dog food. But look, State of the Union, we're selling more things to more people in more places, and clients are using data and technology to drive down price, right? And increase their ROI. Like, other industries have had this business problem. We seem to make it very hard, or harder than it needs to be sometimes. So I guess I want to take a sort of gut check. Like, are we really at this true point of convergence? Do you see, if you're selling, do you see your agencies and your marketers actually truly planning and activating in a unified, ubiquitous, cross-campaign, one audience basis? And if you're buying, does the world really work like that? Because I hear a lot of different stories. So Jenny, I'm gonna let you start, because you guys are really integrated through the line. So how do you look at premium content?
So to answer your question, I think we're quite a long way away from being able to do that. So I'm old enough to remember when we got TV audiences delivered in a book format. So on a Tuesday morning, there's a few people in this audience that will remember it as well. They might be denying it. But we literally got a green book sent to us to see what ratings our campaigns had done the week before. So we've obviously moved a long way from there. But equally, we're genuinely not there yet, and we can't, as agency people, we can't genuinely say to our advertisers when they've got X million pounds to spend across video content, we genuinely can't yet optimize across all the platforms that are available. We don't yet have a single customer view, and as an industry, we've got a long way to go to actually to get the convergence that we really need to be able to give advertisers best advice.
Jonathan, what about you on sort of just being a broadcaster and a digital publisher both?
Yeah, the answer to your question is no. So should we move on? As in, no, we're not there. I'm
Is that because you're not ready to be there, or the demand isn't
I don't
there?
think the industry is ready to be there. I'm with Jenny. I think that, and I come from I also used to do spot matching with the Barb book. So we've suffered each at the same time. I think that we aren't there as an industry in terms of commonality of measurement. I think it's extraordinary actually that this feels like a conversation we've been having for 20 years now. But we've got to get our act together in terms of we have a measurement issue, and I think that the challenge that the TV industry particularly faces, if you want to call it that, is that there is an imbalance between the level of perceived accountability of the TV medium, if you want to call it, versus the perceived accountability of digital media. And I use the word perceived deliberately. And I think that we as industry need to find a way to redress that balance. It's not that one is right or wrong, or one is better or worse, but there is an imbalance in perception, which I think is distorting investment decisions.
So, okay, so Mark, if Panacea came and we had an unduplicated reach curve that was with confidence and PII data across every platform, really would it be as simple as one audience, one price? Like what I've saw, and the reason I ask that is because I'm actually self-reflecting that, I thought convergence would come faster, to be honest, right? Having been on both the buy and the sell side. But I sat this morning and I listened to all these super smart analysts that are in the weeds of the data. And the ultimate conclusion they had is that if you track behavior, it's different for millennials versus, middle-aged people like myself, right? You tend to watch more TV as you get older. And the trajectory is likely that 20-year-olds today are going to watch more TV when they're 50, and 50-year-olds make a ton more money. So it's a different audience, right? So if you have that, are you really going to spend that way?
No, I don't think we're ever going to get to the point, even if we reach a sort of nirvana, convergence nirvana, where in theory, every person or every member of the audience you're going to reach has equal value. They're always going to be, for every brand, audiences that are more valuable than other audiences. And the litmus test for getting to a world where we might be able to deliver perfectly across every single platform is not, can I reach those audiences most efficiently? It's, can I still drive the outcome I want to get from reaching those audiences most effectively? So can I still drive the results I need to against those audiences? And that still starts with identifying who you need to find. And sometimes, new converged platforms will give you answers and new ways into audiences that you perhaps couldn't have got to previously. And Sky is quite a good example for certain advertisers of finding those groups. But for a lot of advertisers, they'll have to sort of think through the logic, I think, of does trying to get perfect targeting make sense? Because in fact, I think a lot of the value that we still get from TV is in driving high reach and not being perfectly targeted. And that's okay, because we can still see a lot of the time it drives effective results. So, and that will happen on a case-by-case basis for brands, but every brand is going to have to think through the logic. Is it worth me putting the time and investment and resource into getting ever tighter towards the perfect audience? Will that change what I can do versus what I have today? And that's always going to be the tension and the process that'll have to be worked through, regardless of whether it can be done or not.
So Calvin, one of the things, if you look at the sort of legacy of Tube as a DSP, right? One of the things that ultimately the initial aspirations of Brett and of your team were to enable a platform that allowed for premium video content to be bought as close to TV, right? You guys brought Nielsen in early, et cetera. Is that what's being done?
Absolutely. So I think the way that we approached video online was very much to kind of speak to TV buyers and look at online video as an extension, as a complement to activity that was run on TV. I think the challenge over the years has been truly connecting the efforts across TV and online. I think there are kind of survey methodologies that you can put in place to look at the incremental reach driven by online TV on top of TV, but I think the goal, as we've discussed right here, is really to be able to start at point zero and figure out with an investment of X dollars, what's the best way to allocate your resources across each of these screens?
So that's a good question. So you use the incremental reach, right? So is premium video simply reach extension for television? Or, are people on your platform buying by age and gender? Or are they using first-party data, which is the promise of programmatic that is the lift that everyone said it was going to bring?
Yep, so I think this is a really major key. So right now we've definitely seen that brands and agencies have invested a ton of money and a ton of time into building out extremely rich digital data assets. So they have an incredibly strong understanding of different audience segments, what kind of values they drive for different products, and they're able to put this to really strong work in the digital world. So I think that's a kind of a large gap in the TV space that we see companies like Sky able to address, is enabling these brands to start to bring all of that intelligence, all of that savvy from the digital world to play a major role in their planning process on TV.
So Brian, I think you have an interesting perspective because you're in the weeds of the data, and my experience is when you see the data presents the truth, right? Mm-hmm. So I struggle with, having been on the buy side, I've sat with my agency, my former colleagues, and if you look at the economics and the value chain today, most buyers always want the value add of data to be at the time of the ad call. Mm-hmm. But if ultimately you're not bringing data upstream to the sell side and somehow you're not closing that loop, are you really able with confidence to have that assurance that when you start layering around video assets, you start layering data and addressability on at the time of the ad call, that you have that confidence? Because it's such an issue right now.
I mean, I think I don't think you have the confidence, but I think that it's not I think you can't take the same approach or the same, so a little backup. If you look at it from a machine learning perspective, it's very hard to come after the fact and tell you why it worked. You have a variety of inputs. You have a lot of possible combinations that work. So you can think of it in terms of, if you spend this much in TV and this much in social and this much in digital or whatever, same content, same audience, there are going to be various combinations and mixes that work. And so you need it as a feedback loop, right? You need this to not just be a one-time planning thing, let's throw this on and this segment is magically going to deliver to us. It's an incremental and iterative approach that needs to be adapted and going across the plan or the flight time so that it is looking at what is the actual outcome. Now that's probably a little more advanced than is possible, but conceptually, it's not a linear problem, right? You can't just solve for it. And I think if you look at it as a process, if you take the old buying and planning processes, they sound familiar and the steps are roughly the same, but the approach needs to be that you're kind of constantly measuring and updating. And because if you bought TV back when you got a book, how many channels did you have to pick from? Right? And the audience and the number of people looking, but the characteristics of the audience who watches TV, not just age and gender, but demographics, income, things like that, are going to be very, very different. And there's going to be some mix for some advertiser, and each advertiser in each mix needs to be considered as an approximation of holistically. And digital goes too far into the weeds. And I think traditionally digital TV had a much better perspective in going at the outcome-based, right? So it's this constant readjustment and balance of, you have the data that tells you one thing, but do you understand what you're controlling for? Right, and you've got to be able to, I'm maybe getting too...
No, so let me just rephrase that. So it's really freaking hard.
It's not...
No, I mean, that's what it's not
just intuitive. It's a process. It's that it's a process. It's not a set it, forget it, let it run, oh, magically this is all going to work and deliver. And you're like, well, why didn't it work and deliver? It's because you're constantly looking at the available channels, devices. So it doesn't matter which one it is, but it's what's the outcome you want to go for. So
if I sort of play that back to you, what I infer from that is that when we've talked about ROI, again, to bring in the conversations of this morning, ROI, ultimately that tells me that media mix, attribution models, all those stuff aren't really prescriptive. They're very dynamic and fluid.
Yeah, I mean, if you started on one in ROI, and then you look at what is actually happening, and maybe media mix is telling you the right thing at one time for one audience. Another thing is some kind of attribution modeling using multi-touch. Like, it's not just one thing, and I think that's what makes it complicated. Okay. It's not that any one of those things is complicated. It's that you can't just go and buy 4 channels and reach, some newspaper, a little bit of print.
So I got to be honest, guys. Like, taking this all in, like carrot stick. For what are we doing that? I mean, so I've heard from multiple players, colleagues in private, in public, on previous panels I've moderated that, one audience, notice I specifically did not say one audience, one price for video, because there does not appear to be an economic incentive for cross-platform ubiquitous pricing, right? There's not a currency to enable it. It's hard, but ultimately I think there's still a perceived economic upside to differentiate price by platform. There are premiums to be had, right? And every purveyor and every content seller suggests that their platform offers a premium, right? So if that's the case, and it's really hard, and we don't have absolute confidence in the data, we don't have a currency with which to transact, we see short-term economic upsides for large publicly traded companies that are running billion-dollar businesses. Are we really going to, why are we going to get there? Why? If we can't tell our advertisers, and all we hear is we're getting hammered by marketers that they want transparency and confidence and integrity in the data, and it's still questionable when we start to talk about marrying these two mediums, are we taking 10 steps forward and 11 steps back? That's a softball to anyone.
I guess from an agency perspective, we can't do this in any channel anyway. So we've always worked in this, imperfect world where you have different data sources for each of the individual channels. And part of why advertisers need to work with media agencies is because we have, people, teams, processes, ways of pulling the different pieces together and ways of approximating multimedia coverage and frequency and things like that. So I think advertisers are actually quite comfortable with, the way things are. As an industry, of course, it's an imperfect world, and we would love it to be easier and quicker and all the great advantages of getting to a kind of single platform. But these aren't really the conversations that we're having with advertisers, I don't think, because I think they're quite comfortable with it.
And Mark, what in Europe, how does the sales house construct affect this, right? Because most sales houses are they're also bifurcated, right? They're typically moving traditional, sales teams are allocated to traditional broadcast or to digital. That is a foothold that is pretty strong, right? So how does that impact the long tail and even the mid tail for Europe?
The reality is TV is going to be fragmented, and it's going to be fragmented in every market, and it's a reality that you have to work around. I don't think that there are going to be some solutions that help to solve for that in certain instances, but I think that's a reality for most markets that agencies and brands are going to have to continue to deal with. So that's not going to go away, I don't think. And I think then the question becomes, what tools do you have that allow you to make a good enough judgment on what the right kind of cross-channel strategy might be. And I think just to echo Jenny's point, I think I speak to very few brands who look at this and go, there's a problem around, I need to reach a converged, I need a converged solution to reach audiences in perfect sequence at minimal pain across multiple territories. That is never a brief that I would ever hear. I would hear, where do I spend my money to get the most benefit for the brand and the most return? And I think to make this a thing that advertisers want to buy and they lean into, it's incumbent on us, I suppose, in the industry at large, to link the benefit back to effectiveness, and to find a way to build the logic around, this is a better way of doing it because you can get more for your money out of it versus what's available now. And by the way, also we're going to try and make it not really, really complicated and really, really hard, because marketers are short of time and they're short of production budgets and all the rest of it. And there are some barriers, I think, to get around to be able to make this something that brands and advertisers really lean into.
So Jonathan, for you, your paradigm today, I would suspect, is more often a brand or marketer or an agency coming to the table saying, I've measured your media and it's not delivering. I want you to either drop price or give me more for less, et cetera. But what's it going to take? For the kimono to open, it feels like what you need to be empowered to actually address the marketer's needs.
Yeah, that question's always been there. I've worked on the buy side, the planning side, and the sales side. It's always been the case that an agency or a client will try and drive down price. Look, I am, broadly speaking, very encouraged and optimistic about what I've seen today. I think that the pendulum has swung very markedly over the last few years towards the digital world, and Discovery Eurosport is obviously investing huge amounts in digital. But I get the sense that what you might call traditional TV business is becoming more and more accountable. I think the initiatives that Jamie and others, and we're working with the guys at Sky on AdSmart, are making TV more accountable. And I think the rigor of questioning around some of the digital data is becoming more rigorous now, and so I think we're starting to see a meeting point in the middle, and that to me is very encouraging. I think the more that we sort of treat or look at the thing from an equal perspective, treat apples and apples, the better for all of us concerned. I think we do ourselves a disservice if we make it incredibly complex, it feels like often that as an industry we try and make something that's actually quite simple, really complex, and the great default position is then, well, bugger it, I'll just stick it all on Facebook, because they've got the data and it's accountable. So I think, again, we need to make this process simpler. And the media planning job, that's what these guys are paid every day to do and have been doing for 30 years, deciding which is the optimal media mix. That isn't new either. Certainly we've got more data to make that decision more informed. But there hasn't been that much change. Right. So, as I say, broadly speaking, I'm encouraged and positive about the future for the ecosystem.
So, Calvin, you know, if you look at programmatic, and I'm going to apply a definition to it, and it's more than just automation, this construct of creating a marketplace where you're aggregating media like EBX, what Paolo talked about, right? So, giving Adobe that position of a marketplace. You know, we've seen that marketplaces have evolved very siloed, right? There's premium video, there's display, and programmatic means the reason it exists in each of those is different. Now there's local television in the US, we have national, right? We seem to continue to have a proliferation of vertical technology solutions to enable this evolving world that we're in, audience-based buying. At what point does this sort of, do we hit a point of diminishing return, or how does that all come together for a marketer to enable that? Because it may be getting easy to use your data or to buy an audience, but if it's not easy to buy it across channels, again, we seem to go in circles.
I do think we're getting closer to a point where it is easier to buy across channels, and I think absolutely as we become more focused on the data that advertisers have available for their efforts online, I think planning across screens becomes more and more complicated. I think with age and gender targets, we can start to work out rough models of what kind of reach we can achieve across screens with different investment allocations. But when we start to look at different audiences, and every brand is looking at a very different audience, I think you find that different pieces of media will have quite a different value than what had previously been accepted as a value for that spot or the value for that impression. And so I think, you know, looking, once we get to the world where we're able to look quite clearly across these screens and bring in all of this audience data, I think it benefits both buyers and media owners to have kind of better value kind of surface for audience segments.
Cool. So we had a very positive and optimistic morning about the future of television. That's kind of why I wanted to just start with a little bit of just a reality check about where we are, right? And we were talking a lot about the what. So let's talk to the how, because it is exciting, and all of you are doing great things to move the needle forward. So Brian, what role really does data play? Because data can either make your job really hard, or it can make the prescriptive actions pretty straightforward. How do you integrate that into planning today?
I mean, I think the use of the data is to help you achieve an outcome, right? So some things it's going to be straightforward, some things it's going to be more complicated. The complication comes from the combination of, like you said, all of the channels. How do you value that mix of inventory? But I think that how you get started is stop using proxy measures for outcome. Like, get closer to what actually drives business value for someone else. Fraud falls away if you don't pay for something that doesn't actually drive value, lift in brand awareness, or people showing up in stores or something like that. Someone else should be taking care of it, paying attention to it, but is this the right audience, right? Because the marketer just wants to reach their audience. They want it to be simple. I want to spend my money, I want to reach the right people. They don't know exactly who it is. No one follows an ideal journey. Like, I'm interested in enough people buying my stuff, and the advertiser needs to be able to understand, okay, this is what the media owner needs to understand, this is what you want. This is how I think the inventory I have lines up for you, using whatever data they have, right? And in some cases it's age and gender. In some cases it's super detailed history of someone logged in and they know everything about the last 5 years. That's their job to decide what's the value I can deliver and what's the right mix of inventory that I can, and then there's a meeting in the middle. So the marketplace helps to decide or facilitate that. So it's basically an advertiser having a direct communication, a little bit of technology intermediaries, but a much more direct communication. What do I want? What do I have? Let's find a value exchange that works for both of us. And data is informing those things. Now, there may be third-party data that also informs it, some kind of verification. But if you drive towards actual outcome that you care about, doesn't have to be super detailed. Someone installed the app on my phone in the last 5 minutes. There's no audience for that, right? You can't reach that kind of mass media. What is the right medium for TV? And it's communication and brand and awareness and things that are proven and well known. Don't complicate it.
So Jonathan, if I if I listen to that and just sort of, again, I could infer that the value chain needs, buyers and sellers need to work more closely together. If we start shifting, television in particular, as we know it today, broadcast television, to a more outcomes-based medium. Forget addressability, just make it outcomes-based. And we just talked about agencies doing their jobs very well, buying media. What do the roles of how do the roles of the players of the ecosystem today evolve between marketer, agency, media company? Put technology aside and the role data plays, but just how do the roles as we know them today in the value chain evolve in order to enable this, and outcomes-based buying?
That's an easy exam question, isn't it? That's,
look, you're an A student, so you should be great.
He's just a charmer. Look, we talk a lot about the word ecosystem, so think about what an ecosystem is in the natural world. There has to be something that fuels that ecosystem. I don't think we have a real ecosystem. We have a sort of a very competitive environment out of balance. It seems to me that if I want to strangle this metaphor, that data becomes the oxygen or the water that powers the ecosystem. And therefore, in an ideal world, that would be somewhat ubiquitous, and we would all have access to that. And then everyone does what they're great at. So we're great at producing great content, premium content, entertaining stories, great sports stories that attract viewers. And these guys are great at deciding what their clients need and renting those eyeballs from us, or sort of acquiring them in some, or working with us in some way in regard to that. And now there are people who can inform that decision better with analytical and research tools. So the key stepping point towards that nirvana, I think, is some level of ubiquity and open sort of wiki type approach to the data. Now, whether we'll get to that as an industry, I don't know, but that seems to me sort of one of the, and then we can all work around that and do what we're all great at, because everyone does different things. And I think the danger sometimes everyone tries to get into each other's world, rather than saying,
which results in finger pointing quite often.
Yes, there's some of that.
When it doesn't work,
sure,
right?
Sure. And yeah.
It's interesting because collaboration is a theme that has come up also, and just the need for it. I think the UK has been in a leadership position. But we refer to Jamie as a sort of weather vane, right? But ultimately, Sky is a distributor and a broadcaster, right? So they're in a very unique position to have actionable data. Yep. So, Jenny, creative is something that we don't talk about, right? I don't think anybody, maybe briefly yesterday in the Pathfinders event, but I don't think we've talked about creative. And one of the biggest issues that sort of TV broadcasters defend is the fact that, well, it is really expensive to create this content. That was Jill's analysis this morning. The cost of content has a lot to do with the long tail business, likelihood of success. But it's equally as expensive to create a 30 or a 15-second spot. It's 7 figures plus, right? So when you talk about addressing an audience on TV, you should also probably address the message if you're addressing an audience, which means a different creative variant. And we just seem to, like the economics, when you start to, if you're addressing at the time of the ad call, you're paying additional CPMs on top of the CPM for the media in order to be able to target, and then all of a sudden the creative becomes more expensive. Like, the wheels fall off the bus at some point here. So how do you rein that in?
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think it's really easy for media people and data providers to get really excited about the possibilities and the efficiency of being device-specific, platform-specific, different creative for different, for every single person, depending on their situation, geo-targeting, all of the rest of it. And it does put a huge onus on the advertiser in terms of production costs. And that's one of the big issues that advertisers are facing now is, right, we get this as best practice, we get this as a smart technological thing to do, but who's going to create all of this content that they need? And I think, from my perspective as well, I think we talk, at these kind of events, we talk so much about data and audiences, and, of course that's critical, and of course it's, our opportunities for targeting are just getting better and better. But equally, that's only one component of putting together a brilliant media plan, because it's also about context, it's also about content, it's also about what the big idea is really, and that's why I think within media owners and agencies, you see a huge growth in partnership teams, creative solution teams, all the teams that can actually knit everything together around an idea. And quality of data is one component that feeds into that idea, but I think we need to remember to have the idea first, and the audience is the plumbing, really. The tech and the platform is the plumbing.
So all of you have unique respective businesses in advertising and in the ecosystem. Would any of you be willing to change your business model to 100% outcomes-based for marketers or advertisers?
I think it's very difficult to transact based on outcomes. I think it's definitely quite important to have that front and center in terms of evaluating any campaign based on whatever goal that your advertising partner has. But that's quite a lot more variable than I think the price of media that you're purchasing, and quite difficult to track.
If you had a business case that there was an upside for you in that, do you think you would change your mind if you ran the numbers?
I think there are so many models for looking at what is success for an advertiser, for an individual campaign, as machine learning, everybody's favorite word, really advances to a point where we have tremendous certainty around what kind of actions on a campaign are going to drive specific types of results. I think it's still murky from a planning perspective and also from a measurement perspective.
So I feel like we keep talking, we need to eat our own dog food, as my dad says, because we keep talking in circles, right? So we all sort of point, all roads go to outcomes-based and business KPIs. And if we just look at how it's moving the P&L of a marketer or an advertiser, the answer will be all this stuff is good, but it's contextual and it's all in exchange. It exchanges value, right? TV is valuable, but it amplifies digital. It all works better together. But if no one ultimately is hanging their hat on how they're compensated or their business model on the outcomes that we're saying is the efficacy of what we do every day, how do we escape where we are? Because then we still end up in the same position where we don't have a common currency, right? We seem to keep splintering the marketplace. How do we get past where we are right now? What's the breakthrough?
I mean, first I would say, not change the business model, but do a project that's outcome-based, sure. Because
Okay.
I think it's the only, you have to constrain it to something manageable. You're not changing your entire business model. And, we sit in between the transaction, if you will. We're facilitating it. We're not the principals in it. So you need a participant that's willing to, you need at least some, either the buy side or the sell side that's willing to participate in that manner, ideally all of the parties participating in that manner, because I think that would focus and highlight where those bottlenecks are. I think until you actually have that level of stake in the game, right? You're not turning your whole business over, but a certain segment of the programming or inventory. What does it really take, right? Where are the real gaps in understanding execution? And maybe it's not possible. So maybe you start and you get to a certain part in the process, say, okay, this doesn't make any sense for everybody, but everybody has the same goal in mind, right? And those goals are surfaced and made clear. I think that on one hand, it's maybe overly idealistic, but it's to say, okay, what is the job that you need to have done by this process, right? What do you as the advertiser need to have as the outcome? What are you really willing to pay? Because I think if you look at, and I think it's a panel going on right now, if you look at political campaigns and you look at the platforms that get built for political, those are outcomes driven. They only have work if they win. Right? And they have, in the US too long, 18 months, 24 months, but, they do thousands of creative iterations to your point.
And they pay extreme premiums, by the way.
But they care. They actually care. Whereas I think most people, it's like, yeah, I'd like to do that, but it's not my job. I don't get paid for that. It's not because they don't want to. It's because the momentum and kinetic energy going into what they do now is, and, the reward systems and incentives are sufficient to keep them doing what they do now. Right? So if there are incentives that are aligned with an outcome that everybody agrees is a reasonable outcome, I think you'll see a lot of creative energy unleashed towards that. But that goes far-reaching into business practices and models and compensations and kickbacks and all of the history that goes behind everybody's business. Is it practical? I don't know, but I think it's a reasonable exercise to go through as to what would it take to get you to participate. So
Mark, Jonathan, when you guys sit down with marketers, is that conversation, do they broach that? Is that, because that's what they're holding you accountable for of delivering. Mark, effectiveness was, I believe, the word you used in prep, right? You're being held accountable for that, but are they willing to change the conversation?
It varies, and there are definitely some clients who try and push agencies and the vendors they work with in this direction, but purely basing that relationship on outcomes is problematic, and it's problematic for a couple of reasons. And I'm not suggesting that some kind of outcomes-based incentive or might be part of a mix in the way that brands deal with both agencies and broadcasters as part of the equation. But there are problems with the outcomes-based model. And number one, the things that matter are often not advertising and are outside of our control. So if you really get back to business results and to ROI, advertising contributes towards a portion of that, but ROI is driven by lots of other things, availability of product, pricing, competitive, all sorts of things which we can't control for. So we have to be clear about what outcomes we mean. And the outcomes that can maybe be defined and have been used in the past, and CPA is the obvious one. It's been used for a long time as a trading currency in the digital world. And
cost per acquisition.
Cost per acquisition, right? That model, the trading on cost per acquisition, has serious flaws too, because it's often about finding the media tactics or behaviors that target the easiest audiences you can find to convert, not necessarily the most valuable and not necessarily incremental audiences. And so, just from an agency point of view, I think outcomes can be a piece of the puzzle, but ultimately, our role is to provide good advice around what drives outcomes, and then we can't always be held accountable for it. We can give brands the direction that they need, but I think it's problematic to pin it on that. And I think there are ways which it can be built in, but ultimately, defining what the outcomes are is really hard, and then confining those outcomes.
Agreeing them on upon them is probably, or how they're measured.
It doesn't have a role to play in the mix, but I don't think there is. I think it's problematic to pin it on outcomes.
Calvin, are you selling based on? Are you enabling buying in the DSP based on performance?
We are really kind of a technology provider. So clients are working with our platform, driving the result based on the goals that they have, and kind of.
But when they buy and they get an invoice for that media, it's mostly on a cost per thousand basis typically.
That's charged on the cost of media plus a technology fee for using our platform.
Right, or any data that's added, right?
Yep.
Because that's all additive,
yep.
Right? So that process, just to sort of walk through it, is when you're at a programmatic DSP or a buying platform, a demand side platform, you sort of, you choose your audience that you're targeting, whatever third-party data sets you want to use to further target that audience, and then you choose that medium, right?
Yeah.
So that's interesting. So Jonathan, where do you start? Like from the perspective of having a portfolio of media assets across all of these platforms, how do you start the process of productization and packaging them? Because it's almost like, even though the reality is the big gorilla in the room is nobody's really ready to do this, but you still sort of are forced by the market forces require that you prepare for cross-platform selling and buying and the eventuality of maybe a currency that will enable that. Yeah. Where do you start?
I mean, we in common with many other broadcasters and publishers are doing that already. We're already selling in a cross-platform where we're selling TV, digital, we're selling mobile, we're selling experiences, we're selling branded content. So that partnership-based approach that we've talked about is there already. I think, again, the more data that we can share and genuinely share, the better.
Is your sales team combined? So
yes,
your sales people sell digital and broadcast?
Absolutely, yeah. I think the other thing to focus on is, to take the conversation in a slightly different direction, is if you look at the success stories in our world now, and the ones that we all talk about would be Netflix, Amazon, what they have in common. Netflix hasn't reinvented the content experience, but it has reinvented the user experience. It's just a brilliant product to watch. Most of the stuff on Netflix isn't that great. And they'll still have to learn to buy and produce great content, but the user experience is extraordinary, as it is with Amazon. So I think collective as an industry, how do we, as an industry, use data, use different tools to make the user experience of, let's call it linear TV, extraordinary? How do we use that to make if you say that the gold standard is the Super Bowl, with great content, with great advertising that people talk about, is an event. How do we make eventiness more about, that's a great word, more a feature of what it is that we do? How do we make every break a Super Bowl break? How do we get to a position where viewers are choosing the ads they want to see? Now, I don't have the answers to this, but I think focusing more on what we do and making it even better, and for broadcast TV, that's about events, and the digital media is the commentary around those events. How do we make that more a feature of our conversation?
So that's interesting because, you know, one of the things you sort of go back to is television and broadcast will retain its value because everybody wants great content, and that'll remain, right? But so
everybody wants a great, I believe everybody wants a great communal experience. People still want to come together, particularly in a world that's fragmenting more than ever. And I think that broadcast media, and particularly sort of in some of the content that we talk about, whether that be sporting occasions like the Olympics, whether that be Game of Thrones, that stuff brings people together. And I think even the younger audiences that I talked to, I did a mini focus group yesterday with a group of millennials at Outcomesbased. They want to be that sense of security and to be brought together again. And I think that our media does that. So,
but the big point you brought up is that ultimately when you talk about, you know, diversifying and expanding to owned and operated digital platforms, mostly over the top or IP, your owned and operated ones, discovery and the user experience is essential, right? So is usability and the front end experience, is that actually content creation? Because that's a whole, I mean, that's a very separate competence. It absolutely can be data driven, but it's still sight, sound, emotion, and aesthetic, right? And what we have is a splintering of channels there. So is uniformity something that will be a tipping point for the industry and value? Because my experience, at least in the US, is every authenticated broadcaster experience is very different. How I watch their live linear stream versus how I get their on-demand content and the ease of access and discoverability. I mean, that's what Netflix worked at cracking, right? And Hulu's worked on it.
I think the process is Darwinian, and the best ones will survive, and the ones that aren't as good will fade away. Anyway, I don't want to fire in there, guys.
I mean, I would just say that what you're touching on is basically behavioral design, and TV had a certain behavioral design around shows and breaks and series and finales and extent. Like, there was a certain clear intent to deliver an experience, shared or otherwise, to the viewing audience. I think what you know, the software side of the world, the Netflix and the Amazons and apps and things like that, is they understand that. And I think that is not conveyed in the current broadcast consumption at all, right? So, you know, I don't know who's the right person to provide it, but I think that there is such a variety of things you can watch, of good, historically, new, old, doesn't matter. There's an abundance of content, so there has to be some other reason for you to do it, right? You look at how Netflix and Amazon, I think both, like, you watch a show, the next one will auto-start a few seconds later. That keeps you going, right? That's a design that actually looks at what people do. They take the data, they apply it, and they make it behave in a certain way to get you to do what they want you to do. And I think you have to have an analogous situation to get people to do what they want you to do. And I think actually advertising has a decent history in understanding behavior and motivation and emotion and tying those things together. And there's probably some interesting mix.
Okay, so just sort of a round robin question for all of you. You've all sat in the panels, you've seen at least some of the panels earlier today with the analysis and, you know, audience changing behavior, et cetera. So a year ago versus today, I mean, a year in television is actually probably like a month in dog years. It's the reverse corollary, isn't it? So maybe that was a wrong time frame. But, you know, what are you doing differently today that you know, were not doing a year ago because we truly are moving down this path of convergence, or whether it's convergence of sort of ubiquitous video and cross-platform, or it's the fact that it's a more outcomes-based world of investment and spend. I mean, how is your job different today than it was a year ago, and how do you see it being different a year later? Who wants to go first?
Start that, Davies. I'll take all the good.
I would say one of the big differences today, something we're doing a lot more of, is using digital and social media more as to observe consumer behavior, to observe trends, to observe interests and motivations of consumers. And we're using a lot of the data that we're getting from that kind of work to inform our TV strategies, to inform our whole above-the-line communications. So I think you know, the depth of information and the quality of the information that we get now from digital and social platforms about what consumers actually want is you know, is just mind-blowing, and that's really informing it.
And a year from now, you think it'll be more of that, or?
Yeah, I think there'll be more of that. I think, you know, I think the thing that advertisers are really interested in, again, you know, this is partly why I, you know, genuinely believe TV's done so well within the digital kind of ecosystem, if you like, is that, you know, advertisers are still really, really interested in content. They're interested in programs. They're they're all at the upfront season. They want to know what's coming. They're really interested in access to talent. They're interested in how they can just develop relationships with broadcasters way beyond buying spots and target audiences and efficiency and cost of media and all that kind of stuff. So I think there's a huge interest in the world of television, really, beyond the ad break.
Okay, Mark?
So I think we're on this path already, but I think, you know, where we're getting towards in whether it's a year's time or not is for every brand to have an approach to TV and a strategy and a way of delivering it that's not easily replicable. And what I mean by that, I think, is there is a more flexible toolbox of stuff that you can do with TV, whether that's linear, on-demand, programmatic, creative solution, et cetera, that means moving away from kind of standardized, here are some normative rules for how you deliver TV campaigns, which I know is in the past already. We're moving away from that world. The world is where every brand understands the role that TV plays in driving their business. But not only that, they understand the various constituent layers that form part of that mix, and are able to construct and design their campaigns in a way that does it. So you have complementary messages, and you might be going reach over here on specific audiences down here. That doesn't mean that everything has to be joined up and perfect and converged. I think what advertisers want, and what I think I want, is flexibility. I want to see the TV landscape and my relationship with broadcasters as a toolbox from which I can build the right stuff that works for the brand. And I think, you know, Sky do a good job of that. It's not one size fits all thing. There's lots of different entry points, and I think that's where we're going towards, and I think that's what we'll be getting in a year or 2 or 3's time, I think.
Okay. Brian?
I think in the past year, it's gone from thinking about, you know, audience-based buying as kind of an idea, to thinking about audience is a currency, right? And the currency can be interpreted by each party, informed by each party in a transaction in their own way. But the driving towards thinking about, rather than, you know, targeting this or adding this segment or this cookie pool or this, you know, pod or this day part, thinking about it in terms of audience. And then now you have a common way to have a higher level conversation about how this gets executed, whether it's strategy, planning, creative, programming choices, but you start talking about things as an audience, as a currency or a protocol. What I would like to see, I mean, I don't know what the year brings, but I think moving the conversation that people are able to talk about things in a way that is much more closely aligned with what they need to do without having to expose all of the underlying sausage making that goes on for their individual part of it. That you can kind of, you don't have to buy TV and know everything about the production. You don't have to know everything about how TV advertisers think for the thing. That it's a higher abstraction of having a meaningful conversation about what each party cares about.
Okay. Calvin?
Yeah, so I think, again, in spite of all of the obstacles that we've discussed, I do think that technology within the TV world really is racing forward at a pretty incredible pace, driven by motivations across the full spectrum, broadcasters, agencies, brands, and tech providers like ourselves as well. So really just in the past year, I've seen an incredible advancement in our ability to apply really strong data targeting to reach precise granular audiences across online video, connected TV, broadcast linear, and addressable linear as well. I think over the course of this next year, we'll move from a place where we're kind of pursuing individual, somewhat siloed strategies across all of these screens to definitely a much more converged and kind of holistic ability to see audiences across these screens and connect efforts across screens.
Okay. Jonathan?
I think over the last year, what we've done differently is a well-reported huge investment in building our direct-to-consumer business, and the Eurosport players driving that in Europe. So that's a real strategic driver for the company, and I think that the insights that we get from that, the consumer insights, in terms of what we might be doing in a year's time, I very much hope that we'll be working with Adobe, who we are working with, that we're working with John Paul at LGI and Jamie at Sky, to use the data that we all have to do what we do better. Simple as that. And be proud of what it is that we do, because we collectively each do a great job.
Yep. Anybody have any questions? So to be clear, feedback I got in the sessions between was that clearly it's future TV and the future's very bright, which we sort of all expected. So I think we've taken a contrarian perspective, but these guys are all in their own right doing a lot to help our industry move forward, so I commend them. Yes?
Do I need a mic?
No, I'll repeat what you asked.
At what point in time does creative also play a role of accountability in this mix? So even if we had all the data smooth and we had the perfect audience for the perfect advertiser, at what point do we go, your creative was just really...
Yeah, so that's a great point, because that's the finger pointing. It's either, if something doesn't work, creative points at media, media points at creative. So Jenny, Mark, since you guys typically are pointing fingers amongst yourselves, I'll let you field that question.
I think, I mean, it is interesting. I think, you know, digital media has kind of changed the game completely for us. So where historically it was, you know, everybody was in the dark, what went wrong or what went right, why did it work, why did it not work? When you're, as a media agency, when you're actually serving the ads and getting the data back about what is working and isn't working, and you're getting that back immediately, you do then suddenly have a little bit of an upper hand compared with, you know, the people who are actually creating this stuff. So it's a bit of a delicate balance in terms of the relationship. But you know, when your digital team are literally seeing one piece of copy working very differently to another piece and reporting that back to the advertiser because that's their job to do, then you're in a different territory than we've ever been in before, to be honest.
One more question, anyone? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.